This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at NumberFire.com, and this is episode 185 of the Late Round Podcast, one of the many shows that are part of the NumberFire Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. Stop vetoing trades. There are a few reasons why your trade vetoing commissioner sucks. First off, who's to say a trade is lopsided? Sure, there are cases where one side seems obviously better than the other, but we all know there's an unpredictable nature to fantasy football. We all know there's variance. To say one side of a deal is so much better to the point of vetoing is saying, I know more about football than you do, so I'm not letting this trade go through. Like at Jake_1121 hit me up this week and said, please settle this debate. Someone in my league traded Gronk for Graham and Crabtree when there were viable wide receivers on the wire like DJ Moore. Please just give me a comment so I can tell them how horrible it was. I mean, Rob Gronkowski has scored no more than 13.5 fantasy points in a single week since week 1. He's been a top 12 tight end in just 2 of his last 5 games. What if Gronk continues down that path? What if that league manager isn't liking what he's seeing? Now, I think Gronk is still a strong fantasy asset at an awful tight end position, but we can't pretend that he's producing at this ultra high level right now. I also think a lot of commissioners in leagues veto trades out of jealousy. Like, I get it. I'm in leagues where trades go down and I see them as completely one-sided, and it annoys me that I'm not getting a deal like that done. It's frustrating to see a team get what looks like a better deal, making them better, while my team looks the same. But that doesn't warrant a veto. Finding trade partners and exploiting the weaknesses of your league mates is something that should be rewarded, not frowned upon, not vetoed. If the trade changes the integrity or competitiveness of the league, then maybe you should try to search for new league members. Either that, or you've got to accept that some members of your league might not be into this whole fantasy football thing like you are. And that's totally okay. But don't veto trades because there's not enough balance in your league. And if you're in a league where commissioners are vetoing trades left and right, either get out of that league or send them this episode. Make them listen to this intro. Because unless there's absolute clear collusion, there should not be vetoes. We'll get to the questions for this week's mailbag in just a second. Before we do that, I want to remind you guys about the weekly free play for NumberFire Podcast Network listeners. In last week's NumberFire free play, Big Daddy B303 took home the top prize with a score of 172.28. They stacked the Steelers hard, going with Big Ben, James Conner, Antonio Brown, and they also had Vance McDonald, and they ran it back with Jarvis Landry. And then they also had Tyler Boyd, Larry Fitzgerald, and Marlon Mack. If you want to play in the Week 9 free play to win NumberFire premium subscriptions and FanDuel points, this week's URL is fanduel.com/league/NumberFire. That's fanduel.com/league/NumberFire. This first question's from @Papa What are you doing with James Conner at this point? Most talking heads have been saying to sell him for weeks, but all he's done is win people games. Yeah, so I'll be honest with you guys. I've basically refused to give strong James Conner and Le'Veon Bell advice since this saga began because it's not like I have some sort of inside information. The way I view the situation is no different than the way that you view it. So me pretending like I know more about things than you do would be stupid. You don't listen to this podcast for that. You need real actionable advice. I can give you an educated guess, but this is a highly unpredictable situation. I would guess, though, that we unfortunately see some sort of split when Bell returns, which will hurt both backs. But again, I don't know for sure. No one does. And the market for James Conner and Le'Veon Bell is so all over the place that it's really difficult to give sound advice about it. And not only that, but your particular team's situation dictates what you need to do with James Conner. If you're in need of some wins, I'd be more inclined to hold on to James Conner. If you're not, maybe you consider selling to a team that does need to win right now. But like I said, no one really knows what that split's going to look like when Le'Veon Bell returns. I'd also guess that it takes a little bit of time for Bell to get acclimated once he comes back as well. This next one's from @KYJellyJones. I've got both Marvin Jones and Golladay on a team. Would you be trying to sell one or hold both? So I think both will be pretty good options from here on out, given Golden Tate's 26.6% target share is no longer in that offense. It's not like TJ Jones or whoever ends up taking the slot role is going to see that big of a share. Targets have to go somewhere, so both Jones and Babytron are going to benefit. The question, though, is if you should be trying to sell one of those since you have both. And my answer is probably yes. I don't like starting pass catchers from the same team because it can limit upside, and if that offense poops the bed in a given week, then you're kind of screwed. Or if you're choosing between which one to start, it might become difficult. So sure, try to sell on this Golden Tate news. I'm still preferring Golladay because he's more of a traditional X receiver, so Jones would be my target to try and sell. But he should still be good rest of season, so don't take that the wrong way. This next question's from @ONathan. Does Golden Tate hold his value, or does it rise or drop with Philadelphia? I don't really see how it rises with the move to Philly. He's going to a new offense with a new quarterback, so there's already going to be some learning curve there. But he's been in an offense that's funneled targets his way quite a bit this year. Like I just said, he has a near 27% target share. I will say, if there's one positive to the move, it might be touchdown upside. I would imagine that Philly moves Golden Tate around a bit more than he did in Detroit this season, which may give him more shots down the field. Because on the season, Tate only has 6 targets that have traveled 15 or more air yards. There are 80 pass catchers with more. So maybe you could make the argument that there's more upside, but I'd say strictly from a projection standpoint, it's a downgrade for Tate. I'd be shocked if he got close to the target share that he was seeing in Detroit. This next one's from @BatesPKen. What's your realistic ceiling for Aaron Jones this year? I think he can be a high-end RB2 or a low-end RB1. If he keeps seeing numbers similar to last week, that can absolutely happen. The biggest issue with the Packers offense is that they're the second most pass-happy team in the red zone, and they've been the 4th most pass-happy team at the goal line. And we know touchdowns drive this game. So I do worry about Jones's touchdown ceiling a bit because Aaron Rodgers is going to throw because it's Aaron Rodgers. But Jones has a chance to be a really solid option from here on out. This next one's from @SamFF3. Could the Colts defense be a plug-and-play rest of season, including the playoffs? Lots of home games against below-average offenses coming out of their bye. I don't think a ton of defenses are plug-and-play worthy, but the Colts do have an incredible schedule after this week's bye. They'll get the Jags, Titans, and Dolphins in Indianapolis over their next 3 games. Then they'll face the Jags again, then the Texans, Cowboys, and Giants. Now, the Colts aren't incredibly strong defensively, so I'm hesitant to say that they're a plug-and-play option. But I would guess that they'll be a strong streamer for a lot of those matchups. So if you have a deep bench, you could always try to stash them and just play them when they're at home. This next question is from @KyleSilvio. At what point in the fantasy season should you shift from holding guys with potential upside to filling out a team with handcuffs or guys who project well for the playoffs? I think it depends on where your team is at. If you're sitting pretty at 8-0 or 7-1 right now, then just go for the handcuff types. Play it safe. But if you need a random player to hit because you're suffering at wide receiver or something, then you have to take on some of those flyers. But like I've said before, players like Malcolm Brown and Spencer Ware have more upside than almost anyone else that you can find on the waiver wire. It's just that the odds that they end up seeing the field from an injury are not that high. This next one's from @XLKahunaBurger. What do you make of the Seahawks receiving corps? Are any of them worth keeping at this point in a standard 12-team league with 2 wide receivers and 1 flex? Thanks. I'm still a believer in Doug Baldwin just because of what we've seen from him in the past. But last week was really a downer for him in particular. It's a low volume offense, and that means for anyone to be relevant, they'll need to see a super high target share. But the good news is that the Seahawks do get the Rams and the Packers after this week's game against the Chargers. So there should be more passing. But Baldwin's the only player that I'd probably consider just because of what we've seen him do historically. This last question is from @CDCarter69. How do you value Michael Thomas rest of season? Does last week worry you at all? I still think Michael Thomas is a wide receiver 1, and last week doesn't really worry me all that much. Or at least, it doesn't worry me like it does some other people. I've seen a lot of talk about how Mark Ingram has changed the way the Saints are operating their offense, but it looks like a correlation-causation issue above all else. Ingram returned in week 5, and since then, the Saints have been the run-heaviest team in football. Before that, they were a top 10 pass-heavy team. But look at the outcome of games that they've played in. Week 1, they lost a shootout against Tampa Bay, so there were a lot of passes. Week 2, they barely beat Cleveland. Week 3, they won a shootout in Atlanta. Right there, you've got 3 games where they needed to throw the football. Week 4 was a game where they beat the Giants, so they were able to run the ball. And then weeks 5, 7, and 8 came, which are the contests that Ingram's been active for. They blew out the Vikings last week, and they blew out Washington back in week 5. On the season, New Orleans has run 217 plays while trailing. From weeks 1 through 4, they ran 160 plays while trailing, which was the 11th highest in the league. Since then, they've run 57 while trailing, or 19 per game. I'm bringing this up because if the Saints are trailing or if they're in competitive games, they'll throw more than what we've seen. and that'll help Michael Thomas. And since they're facing the Rams, Bengals, Eagles, Falcons, Cowboys, Bucks, and Steelers through the end of the fantasy season, there's reason to be optimistic about the passing attack despite what's gone down over the last few weeks. I feel like I'm in the minority when saying this, but I still think Drew Brees is a QB1 from here on out in fantasy, and that Michael Thomas will be just fine. That's going to be it for today's show. Thanks to everyone for listening. If you've yet to subscribe to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, TuneIn, and Stitcher. And I'm on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you. Enjoy your weekend.